I want to introduce today's breakout session during Empowering Beyond, a playbook for Industry 4.0, digitalization of supply chain. My name is Fred Pond, and I am a retired Chief Information Officer from Columbia Sportswear. I have about 38 years of experience in managing technology and supply chains for companies in distribution, manufacturing, and obviously retail at the end of my career before I retired. I am now a fellow with Avasant's organization. And with that, I'm going to now allow each of our three speakers and panelists today to introduce themselves. Robert, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Hello, my name's Robert Taylor. I'm Chief Information Officer at Fluor Corporation. Fluor Corporation's a large global EPC company, so engineering, procurement, and construction, mainly in the oil and gas, mining, energy transition, infrastructure area. Obviously, supply chain is an extremely large part of our business on a global basis, and happy to join the call. Thanks, Fred.
Super, thank you, Robert. How about you, Raj?
Hey, thanks, Fred. Really great to participate in this panel discussion. And Robert, good to connect with you again. My name is Raj. I'm responsible for manufacturing relationships and engineering and construction relationships at LTI. LTI is a global digital consulting firm. We are helping organizations become more data-driven and helping them digitize their core. I know today's conversation is around Industry 4.0 and supply chain. There's an area that we are specializing in and helping our global client. We, by the way, are a part of a $21 billion global conglomerate called Larsen & Toubro, very similar to Fluor. It's an engineering and construction major and doing work very similar to what Robert spoke about in the EPC space, dealing with the hydrocarbon, aerospace and defense. And a big part of our business also comes from engineering and construction, core construction. And in the midst of the pandemic, many of the supply chain problems that Robert is possibly facing real time is something that we've been going through. So we've learned from what we do in our own parent organization and helping our global clients, meet similar challenges in the supply chain resiliency and how is it that they can leverage Industry 4.0 techniques and run a more connected enterprise. Great to be here as a part of this panel today.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to you, Jim.
Thank you, Fred. Glad to be here. This is always an exciting topic, especially when we're talking about customers and how we integrate with them and the information, the data that's out there. So yes, I'm a supply chain professional. I've been in operations, distribution, and logistics for close to 30 years. I really deal a lot with the final mile in a lot of cases of putting product in the customer's hands. My career has been dealing with tangible product, we'll call it, so delivery of goods that we touch and manage through distribution centers and deliver primarily in the fashion space. So a lot of time I worked for Oakley for 16 years and and with Luxottica as well and Sunglass Hut, those brands. Most recently, I joined BRP, so Bombardier Recreational Products. I am in the parts and accessories division, so different format for me. This is really about a pure wholesale play and delivering products to dealers so they can support their customers with repairs and add-ons to their products.
Okay, very interesting difference between the direct-to-consumer fashion and now being, more of a wholesaler, pure wholesaler, and obviously in recreational toys versus things you wear.
Absolutely, yes.
We're going to jump right into the topic. We want to start before we go in to kind of some of the digitization and advances that are going on to talk about just challenges that everybody has faced in the last 15 or 18 months since the pandemic came around supply chain and disruptions. So I want to throw out, first of all, the question of, can each of you discuss and elaborate a little bit on some of the things you faced, in what's happened, and because there are times that we've really never seen before. So we'll start this time with Jim and go back in the opposite order of the introductions.
Yeah, it's I know it's a bit of a cliche now at this point, but it's unique in our lifetimes. And, I think, 20 years from now, there's going to be multiple case studies about all the things we did wrong going through this journey. And we're, frankly, we're still in the middle of it. There's vaccines out there. The opening up of the economy again is happening, but those of us on the supply chain side are still in the midst of the battle. It started with the brakes being slammed on because nobody knew what happened, trying to rev the engine back up again, and then suddenly finding there was a not just the previous historical demand, but demand in multiples for a lot of industries, and mine included, and trying to react to that when other countries are shut down, other factories are shut down, and trying to get alignment back in place. The other component, which has been interesting, and I think it's part of what many have termed, this has been a fast forward, a bit of almost a time machine in the evolution of retail and how we handle consumers. It brought maybe what was going to happen 5 to 7 years down the road happen today. What we're finding is that we can't get labor the way we used to. And specifically talking about logistics and distribution, getting people to work in warehouses, getting people to drive trucks, very, very hard to get. And my theoretical view of it is it's been the adjustment. You went from having people working in retail and delivering the product to a client, directly. That's gone. Now we're delivering it to homes. So suddenly, that just doesn't happen. You've got to go back to that point of where the inventory is and how you manage it. Much more labor intensive. And same as you see with trucks. I mean, you see what's going on out there with delivery services and the cost there as well. So we're dealing with all of a sudden inflation in a way that we've not even had a conversation about, and trying to get creative in those deliveries. And now we're dealing with asset shortages and moving product around the country and not having enough trucks, not to mention the whole inbound from Asia where we don't have enough containers in the right locations. Essentially, everything's completely out of equilibrium. And we don't know where that's going to land or what that's going to look like necessarily. I'm optimistic. I think we're going to see something more normal by the end of the year, but it's going to be different, and it's going to be a different equilibrium.
Thanks, Jim. How about we move on to you, Robert? And why don't you comment on the challenges Fluor's seen in this area?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Obviously, as the CIO, day one challenge was getting everyone to work from home. But moving past that, on the supply chain side, we've done a lot of work in surveying all of our suppliers globally, to understand the impact. And what we've seen is probably a 15% impact here in North America, 30% in Europe, 70% plus now in India. And the surprising country, obviously, Asia is now coming back. We don't see much of a delay. What happened over the past 18 months, though, the biggest impact we had was really just workforce availability. To give you an example, we've got a very large project in Canada, and we do all the modular fabrication for that in China. And so when the pandemic first hit, we had a lot of challenges in simply getting workforce into those fabrication yards, not only challenges in getting steel and raw product, but then people to manufacture these modules for a shipment ultimately to Canada. And then to give you another example of the workforce issues that the pandemic brought about, construction in Canada when the pandemic hit, you had to take into account new accommodations. You had a lot more procedures and processes around the safety of the workers, and all of these type of things really that you hadn't thought about before, Fred, just became, quite a big challenge. Now we managed through that, and we're making good progress on that particular project and others, but it was quite a challenge and something we hadn't experienced before, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah, we've definitely seen things we've never anticipated from all this. Raj, why don't you comment on what you've seen? Obviously, you're seeing a lot of clients' perspectives, so probably have a broader brush than a single company.
Thanks, Fred. I'd like to reflect on what Robert mentioned in our own parent organization. Very similar challenges, especially as Robert mentioned, Asia has been impacted significantly because of COVID, and there is now a wave 2 going on. Labor was a big problem, as many of our construction sites are fairly labor intensive, and we did have impact just like what Robert mentioned, and supply chain in terms of fabricated components. We had in many situations fabricated components coming in from China, so that was a problem. But as you said, Fred, I deal with clients in other industries, including automotive and core industrial manufacturing. The chip shortage, that's right now that's hit the market. It's been a big problem for several of our customers, especially in automotive and the extended automotive sector. If Jim had been there, potentially Jim would have also reflected on the chip shortage in Bombardier. So the problems with chip shortage is impacted the output of the vehicles that are being manufactured. I'm seeing problems even in the consumer sector. In the consumer sector, the problem that we are facing is in especially certain white goods where by virtue of the large population segments staying at home, there is a significant amount of spend that they are doing in blenders and food processors and materials of that nature, and that is a big supply chain constraint that is happening by virtue of those goods also not being manufactured enough. There is also a problem with the lack of an integrated supply chain solution. Most companies have implemented some form or the other of supply chain solutions, but they don't have integrated supply chain solutions across demand, across the suppliers network. And right now, in the midst of pandemic, they suddenly realize that they're not able to do what-if analysis, and the constraints because of that is also impacting them. These are things that we are also seeing across the industrial, automotive, beyond construction as well, Fred.
Yeah, totally. It's good to call out the chip thing because there are a lot of key raw materials, chips being one of them, but there are several other. There's issues with some other raw materials and products in all supply chains. So come right back to you, Raj, and I want to ask you, what are you seeing? What have your company, and what are some of your clients doing, and what have they done in the short term to just band-aid some of this stuff?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges that the industrial customers are facing is having real-time visibility. And that is a plethora of data that is available. They have invested in data technologies. How is it that you can leverage the investment in data technologies to bring together all of this supply chain data from across the entire supply chain and then provide for visibility, and then consequently, how is it that you can take decisions? So in this sphere, the leverage of AI and machine learning models has become a significant force. And how is it that you can use the power of conversational AI to interact with this data, ask what-if type questions, and then do these simulations so that you can take decisions that help in alleviating the bottlenecks in the supply chain. This is one thing that we are seeing our customers, take measures right now. Second is, especially in repetitive manufacturing situations, we find that some of these customers have embarked on should-cost analysis and parts rationalization because the original supplier and supplier network is no more valid or it is constrained. So they are looking at alternative means for supplying similar materials and alternate means of manufacturing and fabricating components. And thereby, how is it that they can use certain local suppliers, if at all they are available, and still move forward with the manufacturing and fabrication activities. And in some form, they're also looking at this as a means for reducing cost. The should cost analysis is opening up windows for even cost optimization. These are certain things that we are seeing. One measure that's also happening is, over a period of time, these companies have invested in plants and locations. There is a significant drive right now to rationalizing plants and locations, and so that they can do with a lesser number of sites, improve productivity out of existing sites, and thereby also look at debottlenecking the supply chain. These are some of the things that we are seeing, Fred and Robert.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know from my experience with Columbia, and I've talked to some of the people there, they've made a lot of changes to sourcing in multiple places and trying to adjust things around just because it lowers the risk in one country versus another. Robert, come back to you and how you're dealing with it at Fluor.
Yeah, I think, Fred, to your example about in the retail space, a lot of the things that Fluor is procuring, particularly, rotating equipment as an example, it's all specialty procured, specially constructed. So we don't really have a lot of alternatives from in the supply chain itself to deal with those, types of situations. But, our monitoring of logistics, monitoring of foreign policy changes, all of these type of things took on a whole new dimension. And in the digital world, 4.0 is great. We've got a couple of good examples I'm sure we'll touch on here a little later relative to where we've applied technology. But in some of the actions, it's been more manual, unfortunately, and a lot of, closer monitoring, a lot of, supply chain, supplier interaction, understanding their position, where they're getting their supplies from, where the delays are, seeing what we can do to leverage our relationships and these types of things. But, I'll touch a little later on some of the technologies we're starting to deploy as a result of being in this situation. But everything from logistics through to, just constant communication. Some of the old basic things have been very important to us at this particular time.
Yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's just picking up the phone and talking around the world every day and figuring out who's got a problem and how do you just get around it, especially when you have such unique builds as what you're dealing with versus mass production.
Yeah, I know I had the easier job. Just getting people to work from, 20,000 people working from home was far easier than trying to source some of this material.
Yeah. Jim, how about you at Bombardier?
It's challenging, it seems, at every turn, and it's requiring us to really take a step back and say, team, think about differently. Think about how we can do this in a new way. The shortages are shortages, and they're very real. And you can't create assets overnight. You can't create capacity overnight. So we're in the process of obviously pivoting around, trying to figure out what can work. I don't know of anything that's been magic. I think a lot of companies, like ones that I work for and have worked for, have such a heavy reliance on third-party manufacturing and how we buy and procure goods. And that doesn't give us a lot of opportunity, especially when we're talking about goods with, intellectual property goods, unique, OEM designs. You just don't pick up and go, okay, well, let's go play in Vietnam today. That's a major strategic shift. And in uncertainty, that's hard as well. Yeah, we can make that play, but 6 months from now, that may be the wrong play. What we're looking at right now is how do we get more data to do the analytics to see if we can see some forward-looking trends and really trying to figure out if we can see some signals earlier and see if we can get a little more reactive or proactive rather than reactive, which is where we've been at least for the last 6-8 months.
Okay. Yeah. And that really leads into my next question, which is, what are you doing now to digitize your supply chain further than it has been? It sounds like you're looking at analytics and some data, but there could be other things that you're looking.
Well, one thing we've discovered
to prevent these kind of things in the future.
Yeah, preventing them in the future. I think that's a very interesting view to take on this. I hadn't necessarily thought about that yet. I'm still living in the day-to-day in the trenches, and thinking about the future is kind of a hard thing to imagine, but you're right. The one thing that I picked up, not only Oakley, but I picked it up now where I've been in my new role, there is a lot of data out there, but I am seeing a couple things. A lot of companies don't know how to leverage it. But in addition to that, we don't know how to collect it and pull it together to be a single source of view of truth, especially in the consumer goods space where I live. And, I'm not necessarily living in a world where I have manufacturing completely in my purview. I'm relying on third parties. I'm relying on freight forwarders. I'm relying on your trucking, your small parcel. They all have a ton of data out there. What we need to figure out to do is how do we collect that in a meaningful way and layer it together so we can see what's going on, number one, but exactly like you said, how do we create some forward-looking metrics that are predictable out of that? That is a very good question.
Raj, why don't we touch back with you?
Yeah, so, from digitization of the supply chain, I'm sure Robert has more examples to share, but especially with the industrial manufacturing, customers, one trend that we are seeing is disintermediation. So while there was in the industrial world still a dependence on channels and branches for how is it that they would sell products and solutions, one thing that we're seeing right now is the exploitation of e-commerce and how is it that you are now doing away with middlemen, and how is it that you can directly engage with the end businesses and end consumers. So this has opened up a significant spectrum of investments in many of our customers, right from how they look at the sales transformation, how are they pricing their products. Some of them are highly configured products, even in the engineering construction business. And how is it that you can have highly digital systems to be able to accelerate the CPQ, and how is it that you engage with the engineer to order type businesses. So all of this is resulting in previously siloed, fragmented solutions being integrated so that you would be able to provide for a faster, resilient experience as far as end users are concerned. So this is one significant trend that we've seen in the past, especially during COVID, Fred.
Thank you, Raj. And back to you, Robert, on that subject.
Yeah, I think, really our basic business doesn't change a hell of a lot. But you have to understand when we're using, in the supply chain relationship, there's a lot of interaction with the vendors. And we're seeing, a lot more data being exchanged nowadays and having systems set up to allow that data interaction. You're designing a piece of equipment, you're working with the suppliers who often have the expertise in particular components. You're going back and forward, changing designs, and we're doing that at a data level now versus a document level, which is a significant enhancement. And it's a benefit to our clients because ultimately they want that data to operate and maintain that facility after we've built it. That's kind of one example of things that we're doing differently. Obviously, we've continued to invest in systems that tie into our ERP solutions relative to the whole RFX process and catalog purchasing for a lot of items to bring the procurement process to closer to the end user. Easy to understand in indirect procurement, stationery, and these types of things, but we are applying it to some of the more commodity components in the engineering cycle. But I think, some of the best examples of technology usage we have today is we've spent a considerable investment in some of the Watson analytics tools doing analyzing all types of data relative to certain commodities in the supply chain. As an example, we can price certain gate valves. We look at it across suppliers, we look at their supply, and we get all of that information is presented to the engineering folks, so that helps them in their decision making and obviously in their estimating of the goods. We can look at hedging of commodities. We can look at currency fluctuations and predict that into the future. So it's proving to be a really important tool to our commercial strategies and procurement organization, and it's an investment that is very innovative in our particular EPC world for sure.
Yeah, a lot of change management on people and engineering and communications.
Yep.
So we'll move along now and talk about the pandemic has hit some industries incredibly hard, and they're remaking themselves. Retail is obviously the one that I'm most familiar with, and it is there where clearly Columbia Sportswear is now pivoting to be a much bigger e-commerce, and they are going to go directly to the consumer and change their business model. When I started at Columbia 12 years ago as CIO, most of the business was wholesale to the Dick's Sporting Goods and the REIs of the world, and they're still there, and that business is good, but the other side and the direct to consumer has grown tenfold, maybe more than that. So it's a real disruption, and I think the last 18 months even pushed it more that way. So I'm interested now to hear, how you see your business, if it's having a fundamental change or not, or is it really just fine tuning what you've done all along? So we'll start with Jim on that.
Well, I think, you've heard the term omni-channel that's been thrown around for the last 10 years. And I think any company you talk to will have a slightly different take and view on that. So a company where I'm at today, where we've got a reliance on a dealer network and they're strong partners and long-term partners we've had, how do we enable them to be a partner with us down that journey is kind of where the thought process is in terms of developing that type of strategy, not to leave them out of the mix, so to speak. But as we look now at our distribution network, so being in parts and accessories, not big full units like delivering a vehicle, but
Right.
anything from a small set of screws up to, potential water pumps and things of that nature. How do we position ourselves differently to be able to deliver that in a way to where it can reach the customer if necessary, but at the same time, we can still manage the dealer network? Our distribution centers aren't necessarily thought of that in mind, but you have to think of that now today, that given this pandemic, given what's happened, the shift in how we service our customers and their needs, our infrastructure needs to be designed to do that. And in a lot of cases, it's not. And again, I've talked to a lot of my peers, so I'm not being specific about what I do, but a lot of companies thought they had e-com figured out and they were doing the business. Suddenly, when the volume quadrupled overnight, they realized they didn't have the right play. And suddenly now they're trying to get infrastructure in place, and you don't do that overnight. So what do? You throw a bunch of labor at it, and then what happens? We have a labor shortage. So it all just plays on itself. But certainly going forward, we have to have that lens on every time we look at building assets. And then the same with the data. The data out there is rich. There's tons of data. How do we use that, manipulate that to drive transactions through our business and push the product and get it to the customer when they wanted it or how they wanted it, and give them the opportunity to be able to return it in a meaningful way when we're still dealing in both a wholesale and a direct to consumer environment.
How about we hit you, Robert?
Yeah, our industry, Fred, doesn't change a lot. It hasn't really changed a lot in the last 100 years. The construction industry is pretty consistent, and we're in most instances, maybe my Watson example is a little bit different, but in most instances, we're not early adopters. We prefer to be in the last 5% than the first 5%. So I don't think it's fundamentally changed. We are getting greater interaction with the supply chain, with the various vendors based on, working at a data level. So obviously speed is always something that we're trying to work on. But the fundamental process and the execution and the commercial models, none of that stuff's really changed too much as a result of what we've been through in the last 18 months or so.
Okay. You're not going to start 3D printing electrical or fabrication buildings and things like that.
Well, don't be surprised. We've had some of our innovative employees have come up with that suggestion, but it's, when you're in the middle of the desert, that's also not a very viable option, unfortunately.
Yeah. And now to you, Raj.
Thanks, Fred. Reflecting on what Robert said, our own construction business, I think the fundamentals have not changed. Robert is perfectly correct. 100 years plus, the business models are similar. But what I'm seeing in our manufacturing customers, in our industrial manufacturing, and other, customer base is, as I mentioned earlier, disintermediation is absolutely in. The exploitation of e-commerce for industrial manufacturing customers was completely new or relatively new. And what's now happening is that many of these customers have connected products. So they have connected HVAC, connected chillers, connected fire and security equipment, all sorts of connected equipment are there. Now the focus, apart from just selling equipment and making money off of the equipment, there's a significant focus on the recurring subscription revenues that one can make, because that creates a revenue stream that's from a totally different new business model. So most of these organizations are now looking at monetizing from these data streams coming from their own connected products and equipment, and providing for various bundled services, including preventive maintenance, asset management, energy management, and the likes. And there is a significant amount of investments that is happening in e-commerce solutions bundled with subscription billing solutions, so that they can leverage on this boom of data stream that is coming from their own connected products. It could be healthy buildings, etc. So that is a good trend that's happening, where customers are trying to monetize on the data streams coming from their connected equipment combined with e-commerce itself, Fred.
Interesting. I mean, everybody talked a lot about connectivity and tying other parties together and having equipment talking, IoT devices, it sounds like, in a lot of that. That brings up just a quick topic on, does all this stuff start to scare you about security and cyber issues? Obviously, we saw the problem with the pipeline 3 weeks ago. So Jim, do you want to comment on what your thoughts are around some of those concerns that come in with all this connectivity and sharing information with so many different partners?
For me, it's not top of mind. The company I am at now, it is top of mind, and it's something that they're constantly and always thinking about. I mean, you've heard, and even recently, the ransomware attacks and what they can do. So certainly when you start talking about attaching yourself to a third party, whether, using names, but, a freight company or a warehouse provider or, someone that does the dealer services. So you're talking about third party companies, great data, very rich. Like I said, you can do a lot with it, but you're absolutely right. You're opening yourself up. What data are you bringing in and what's hiding behind that data? All really good questions on how you filter that.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, that's a topic that keeps me awake at night, certainly, Fred, and that it kind of hopes you get to retire a little earlier than you'd pre-planned, just because cyber is something that really is concerning. And obviously the data and the when I spoke about the example of the supply chain, wanting to get closer to your supply chain, but by allowing them to do that, they're allowing, third-party connections and these type of things, which becomes very troublesome. In our work, obviously there's a lot of control systems and these types of things that we're designing, and as Raj mentioned, you do have a whole data deliverable. In our industry, they often refer to it as the digital twin, that you hand across to operations. And I think it is a very challenging time relative to how you do manage that data and that interconnectivity in the future. And I honestly don't know how we're going to resolve those problems. It's just very concerning that it's a risk-reward situation for all businesses to what level of investment they're going to make. But the days of protecting the perimeter are well and truly gone, because of the interconnectivity that we've all got within our businesses and things moving forward. Now, I don't know if that really addressed your question or not, Fred, but it's a daunting topic. It really is.
Yeah, the bad guys got a whole lot more money and a whole lot more effort than any one company can ever come up to fight it. So it seems a bit unfair at this point.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Raj, how about your thoughts on cyber?
Absolutely. I think over a period of the past several years, the focus as far as cybersecurity has been concerned has been more on the IT side. And, we are more and more seeing that there is a prevalence of endpoints, like what Robert mentioned, out in the field, and OT security has become a big priority for many of our customers. And OT security, not just in terms of products that are out there in the market, but even in manufacturing. So when you have a shop floor and the shop floor equipment are now connected, we are doing fabrication equipment, and then it's all sorts of equipment on a shop floor, they're also connected. And how is it that you secure those equipment from being hacked? So it's a big priority. And then the problem is not just technology. Technology is available. You can use technology to secure these endpoints, but it's just discovering these assets and making sure that you've covered the entire spectrum of assets that need to be secured, and making sure that you validate all of these in terms of the various compliant protocols. So that's the big effort, that most organizations are now embarked on. But OT security is a real thing that most organizations are investing in, Fred.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody's working it, but it's a struggle, and there's always a weak link, that the people side of it, and a lot of people get fooled and make mistakes. And no matter how good the technology is, it can't overcome someone that makes a mistake or a disgruntled employee, which is just another factor. So now I'm going to move along to our last question, and that is, looking out where you're going, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5 years or so, where are you thinking about planning for some of the new technologies that are out there and approaches in leveraging digital supply chains? Obviously, blockchain comes up as a very common topic, with traceability and anything like that comes up. But there's other things around different sort of outsourcing arrangements, different sort of solution providers. I know at Columbia, we leverage for our supply chain a company called trade card that then was acquired and became GT Nexus, and then was acquired a third time and is part of a company called Infor now. And they did a tremendous amount of our extended supply chain, and we're a key partner to the success of how we could keep track of the global supply chain. And then the last one to throw out is something like cryptocurrencies or things. So now just kind of lay out the last questions to each of you around what might be going on and you're seeing or planning for in the future. So Raj, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Great question. Three things that I'd like to point out. And, while blockchain, cryptocurrency are real technologies in early stages, many of our customers are, investing, experimenting. Early results, nothing at industrial scale yet, at least in the spectrum of customers that I'm seeing. But the AR, VR, which is more on the augmented reality in a spectrum, it has become real, both in our construction business as well as when it comes to manufacturing. How is it that you can provide for digital work instructions, reduce safety issues, improve quality, all of that with the power of AR, VR, I think is a real application of modern technology. And we see that it's going to be more and more prevalent as we move forward. In our construction business, and I'm sure Robert is doing this, the leverage of drones and robots is also very real in many of our construction sites, remote sites, certain dangerous zones and regions. Work completion, many things today can be accomplished by virtue of robotic equipment and drones, and we are using it very effectively now, and we see high leverage of such technology going forward. And the last is again, when it comes to these construction sites, because we at L&D Group have sensorized 30,000 pieces of equipment, and they're all connected equipment. We're looking at preventive maintenance, asset efficiencies, material tracking, and reducing human errors. With all of this, the technology that is to connect in remote sites, it's a very important piece of how the data is exchanged. So we use what is called as the LoRa network. It's a new technology when it comes to networking and low power networking as well. So that's something that we really experimented in, and then we invested in this technology, which we believe is going to be a lot prevalent going forward, especially in remote sites. These are technologies in addition to what you spoke about, Fred, that we see is going to be very prevalent going forward.
Thanks very much. A lot of great information, and you guys, you're seeing a lot of things, and you're playing with a lot of things. Robert, how about you comment on where you guys are going with some of this?
It's really a little similar to what Raj said there, Fred. That blockchain and crypto certainly, technologies out there. Blockchain is going to have a role ultimately in the supply chain world, but it's again, talking about the construction industry, I think we're going to be laggards in that area, to be perfectly honest. I think it'll be a pretty mature technology and well accepted and understood before the EPC world gets into that space. A lot of the things Raj mentioned, though, augmented reality, we use that a lot in our construction area. Certainly for safety, as Raj mentioned about, looking at facilities in a three-dimensional way early in the design phase, looking for safety issues. We use virtual reality in that space as well. The drone technology we use for like large mining sites, where particularly, in the COVID, getting back to that pandemic discussion again, you're building a large project in the middle of Australia, as an example, and the people are doing the engineering design are working from home in various parts across the country, and to use drone footage to get photography of where they are in the construction sequence out in the field, to work with technicians to help resolve particular installation issues and these type of things. Technology is playing a huge role in that particular space. And the other thing, autonomous vehicles is a thing that's here to stay. all of our, mining clients, as an example, are heavy into whether it's hydrogen fuel cells and all looking at that type of technology. So we've got some good experience in how we've deployed, different type of technology than the IT side, but certainly something that all our clients are focused on and something we're starting to deliver to the customer. So it is a very technology infused world on the construction side, but as in helping the construction process. And then the supply chain, obviously you've got RFID and all this type of tracking things, which are pretty mainstay today.
Yeah, great stuff. I mean, that's amazing that you're into those operational technologies. And I mean, you're going to now be pushed to make sure that you can keep all that stuff connected and running. And are you building your own networks or using 5G and all the challenges that come with all those people and all those things out at a job site?
Yeah, it is. It's the locations. It's connectivity, and as you mentioned before, it's protecting that data and who's got access to that data and these types of things. So, that always rears its ugly head, unfortunately.
Okay, and we'll wrap up with you, Jim, on this topic.
Yeah, right now I'm looking inside and looking at what would make most sense for us over time in terms of where are we going to invest. And what drives that right now, like I said, is the labor shortage. So, there's a lot of emphasis on finding ways to supplement the labor with automation.
Yep.
So looking inside the distribution center, yes, what would make the right sense considering our product, considering you're looking now at having potentially, more consumer driven orders, which are smaller. What you're seeing on the retail sector, as well as a lot of retailers are pushing that inventory pull decision later and later. They don't want to hold the stock. So how do you create an environment with fast turns? How do you set up the systems? So like you said, autonomous equipment that can handle moving product around, bringing it to an individual who then just processes it, or even still having it autonomous in a way where it can confirm itself and put itself on the truck. RFID has been something that's been played around with, and it's certainly something that you could look at. I think that still has a couple evolutions, before that really becomes practical in the type of environments I've managed. The error rates and how you manage that is something that really, I think it has a lot of promise for something like this, especially when you start talking about adding those smart type technologies where it's gonna do the work from a picking, packing, pulling standpoint and processing. I think as far as the delivery services, that is something I would say typically in my past, I would rely on a third party where I would purchase that type of service. I would not make a play to necessarily invest in that, but certainly we would look at if there are ways to better, faster deliver our product we're in. But I'm not going to spend money on something like that. That would be probably maybe a little bit too bleeding edge for myself and how I want to approach it. I've got enough internal issues. I think that digitization could really help and automation could really help.
Okay. I'm going to wrap up today's program, and I want to thank the panelists. I think it was a lot of great information, and hopefully everybody enjoyed the session.